Hello everyone, my name is Nancy Hemisath, and I have been a member of the Sacred Heart community for the last 30 years. I've always been interested in the works of justice and had the good fortune of getting a pastoral ministry degree in about 1990. And so, building on that, I am sharing with you today some thoughts about Catholic social teaching. I'll start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a village on the edge of the river. The people there were very good, and the village life was good. One day in the village, a villager noticed a baby floating down the river. He quickly swam out, rescued the baby, and brought it to shore. The next day, the same villager was by the river and saw two babies floating down the river. He called for help, and both babies were saved. The following day, it was 4 babies, and the following day after that, 8. So the village organized themselves very efficiently, and they had more and more babies floating down the river. But they had a watchtower 24 hours a day, and they were efficient and trained swimmers to go out and save the babies. But no matter how much work they did, there were always some babies that could not be saved. But they were happy with the work that they were able to do, and the village priest came out and blessed their work. And then one day, a young man was seen running upstream along the river, and the villagers said, come back, we need you to help rescue babies." And he said to them, "I am going upstream to find the son of a gun who's throwing kids in the river." This well-known story illustrates the works of charity and the work of justice. It provides some context for our topic today, which is Catholic social teaching. In previous chapel chats, we've explored various elements of the Catholic faith. The element I'm highlighting today is the formation of social conscience according to the teachings of the Catholic Church. To live as a faithful Christian and Catholic, we are called to go beyond the personal morality, piety, and even charity. The Church articulates our responsibilities through its social teaching. Some think social teaching is peripheral to the faith, perhaps even suggesting the Church is getting out of its lane by dabbling in politics and in the secular world. On the contrary, in 1971, the Synod of Bishops wrote this, and I quote, "Action on behalf of justice is a constitutive dimension of the preaching of the gospel." Constitutive is a strong and arresting word that tells us that working for justice is at the heart of the Church's mission. In fact, to ignore the work of justice would be gutting an essential component from living the gospel, therefore leaving us not living it at all. It is not enough to lament injustices. It is critical that we do what we can to actively promote justice. Before we act, we must understand what Catholic social teaching entails. Interestingly, the clear articulation of this social teaching is rather recent in church history. Pope Leo XIII wrote his famous encyclical titled Rerum Novarum in 1891. In this document, Pope Leo spoke out for the protection of the poor, for the need for just wages, and for the value of people over property, and the overarching importance of working for the common good for all. His document became the basis of the labor movement of the 20th century, including the formation of labor unions. These teachings were then reiterated and expanded upon 40 years later by Pius XI, and then again in the 1960s by John the 23rd, in a document called Mater et Magistra. The Church, as mother and teacher, calls all Catholics to the duty of providing aid and supporting development throughout the world. He introduces the principle of the dignity of every human person, regardless of race, religion, or class. In a second document he wrote, Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, he denounces the arms race and advocates for the protection of human rights for all persons. Concurrently, Vatican II published more documents, one related to the call for justice according to the signs of the times. Popes John Paul, and Benedict added to this body of teaching relating to the current social circumstances. They all critique social and economic systems that oppress the poor and the powerless. Pope Francis reiterated these themes and emphasized environmental justice, protecting the earth for future generations. He challenges the whole world in Laudate Si, the care of the common home. Interestingly, just today, we heard that he is releasing a new encyclical for the post-COVID-19 world and his vision for our world. So Catholic social teaching continues to develop even in our own day. Now, there are several themes that recur and underpin the Church's teaching on social justice. Number one, the life and dignity of every human person is paramount. The Church denounces a long list of assaults on life and dignity, including abortion, euthanasia, death penalty, war, violence, racism, and abuse. One recent document from the American bishops called Open Wide Our Hearts, one that we studied here at Sacred Heart, addresses racism and at its roots is the foundational belief in the dignity of every human person. Statements on the need for compassionate treatment of immigrants and refugees is another expression of this belief. Secondly, every person is not only sacred but social. And we organize our society through our families and our communities. We are called to participate in family and community, including economics and politics, in a way that supports the whole society for the common good. Third, while honoring and upholding life and dignity of every human person and participating in social organization for the common good, we must realize that we all have existing human rights and corresponding responsibilities. Every person is entitled to the protection of their human rights, and human rights cannot be maintained without the correlating social responsibilities. Rights and responsibilities are two sides of the same coin. Fourth, a basic moral test for our society is how our most vulnerable members are faring. In a society deeply divided between rich and poor, our tradition teaches us to put the needs of the poor and vulnerable first. This is called the preferential option for the poor. Fifth, the dignity and work and rights of workers is another recurring theme in Catholic social teaching. Work is more than making a living. It is participation in God's creation. The economy must serve the people, not the other way around. Basic rights of workers must be respected. The right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to the organization and joining of unions, and to workplace safety. Number 6, we are one human family being in solidarity with one another. Whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, or ideological differences, we are all brothers and sisters. At the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. The gospel calls us to be peacemakers, and Paul VI said, "If you want peace, work for justice. Now, the specific call to safeguard the poorest among us, laborers and all peoples, no matter where they come from or who they are, is part of believing that each person is a child of God. In addition, we must cherish God's creation beyond humankind and include the whole world. So, the seventh principle, care of God's creation, is another pillar of Catholic social teaching. We show our respect for the Creator by our stewardship of God's creation. The critical challenge our Earth is facing is the climate change and global warming, and this has fundamental and ethical dimensions for people of faith. We cannot honor the Creator if we misuse and abuse creation. So, I have briefly outlined these themes, not as a checklist, but as aspects of the basic call to live the gospel. No one of these themes can be isolated from the others. Let me illustrate. The pandemic of COVID-19 is not in and of itself a violation of Catholic social teaching, obviously. However, the various elements of Catholic social teaching inform how we should handle our response to this disease. The mandate to protect human life means we must do our utmost to protect one another, especially those most vulnerable to the virus, like the elderly and persons of color. We have the right to health care, and with that comes corresponding responsibilities. We know that the use of masks, social distancing, and hand sanitizing reduces the spread of the disease. Our individual choices in this regard can be faithful to our calling or not. Our right to be free of masks does not supersede our responsibility to take care of our neighbors. Also related to this is the dignity of workers and the rights of workers, especially those in meat packing. Crowding of workers into conditions that facilitate the spread of the virus is a direct violation of Catholic teaching. Placing the importance of profits over the value of the workers' lives is obviously wrong. It is the opposite of exercising the option for the poor. Yet another example of interconnectedness of themes is that of climate change. Floods, forest fires, hurricanes are not governed by Catholic social teaching, but how we respond is bound by the mandates of faith. Human activity that has increased global warming through carbon emissions is an underlying cause of droughts and oceanic warming. Decisions we make in our personal lives and in corporations and government agencies contribute to the problem or mitigate it. To ignore the problem and consume Earth's resources without consideration of the effects is a blatant sin against creation and the Creator. In so doing, we violate every principle put forth by Catholic social teaching, starting with the disregard for human life itself, as victims die in climate catastrophes. Social institutions such as families, businesses, and civic groups are decimated, destroying the opportunity to organize for the common good. The option for the poor is disregarded, since the poor are the first to suffer from global warming. Usually, for example, they are the ones living in low-lying areas first flooded by storms. Solidarity with the world's population is ignored due to global demands on our shrinking world. Poor nations will suffer starvation first. So these are two dire examples of how we fall short in our Catholic social teaching as a society. Our hope comes from forming our Christian consciences and acting according to the principles. This brings up the topic of politics, the means by which societies determine who has the power and how the power is used. Pope Francis stated, and I quote, "Politics is an expression of our compelling need to live as one, in order to build as one the greatest common good." Catholics have in recent decades been taught the principle of pro-life as equivalent to anti-abortion. A few bishops have even made this the one and only principle by which we should decide our vote. My reading of Catholic social teaching is less simplistic. Pro-life includes the unborn, but extends far beyond to include COVID-19 victims, immigrants, refugees, victims of racism, impoverished and starving people, victims of weather calamities, and future generations of our planet. Informing our consciences and our decisions politically and otherwise, we need to remember each of these themes and the entirety of Catholic social teaching as an integrated whole. Returning to our opening story, it is not enough for us to try to pick up babies floating down the river. We are called to go upriver and discover the causes of injustice and address them directly. This is a far more demanding call, but one we cannot ignore. This is the work for justice, constitutive of living the gospel. The whole of Catholic social teaching affects every part of our lives, starting with how we treat the person in front of us. As one with the body of Christ, we also have the responsibility to play our role in the big picture, according to the gifts that we have been given. As we each pray and ask to be led to do our unique bit for justice, we will be bending the arc of justice toward the fulfillment of the kingdom of God.